Hi, this is Jessica Kennedy. This is week 4 discussion board on historical scholarship. This week, discussing my research plan, basically the scholarship of how I'm going to go about doing this. And since my topic is the social impact of the mafia within Hollywood and other media types since it began, really. Um, I'll be using parts of the Boyer method as was mentioned in our lectures this week. The first part of it is the discovery, because that is where my primary sources will come from. That is my data and my firsthand sources, things like that. The second part is integration, which is so important for me because that's the social aspect that I'm bringing in, the psychology, the sociological aspect, and even a little bit of the religious parts of what was going on between the church and the mafia, which has a big deal in the influence of how people perceived it. This week, we were to dive into the Jerry Falwell Library and go over the Oxford Scholarship Online as well as Project Muse. I'm going to start out with the Oxford Scholarship. I had a really hard time finding necessary things for me. I found a lot of things that led me to other things, or I found things were locked, but I found them in other places in other databases within the Jerry Falwell Library, which was great. So it was a great starting point for me. One of the ones that I found was called Dreams and Dead Ends, the American Gangster Film by Jack Shadowland in 2003. This is where the author really talks about each era of gangster notoriety, and he goes all the way from the 30s to the 1980s with the big bust of the organized crime and everything around the country until the end, when the book was, of course, stopped. Another book was from Oxford is The Hollywood Aesthetic, Pleasure in American Cinema by Tom Berliner. That was a 2017 book. Berlin discusses the intent and results of Hollywood's film agenda, noting that Hollywood, whether they perceive it as morally wrong or what they're putting out there, they're going to put out whatever sells the most tickets and makes the most money. So it's not really a moral judgment for them. And they're not really looking at the outcome of what it does to society or, anything like that. Moving on to Project Muse database, there was a vast number of journals and articles and some primary sources, newspapers that led me to things like that. Within Project Muse, it seems to be a much wider database. One of the things I want to talk about as a journal there, it's called by Alex Shulman in 2010, talking about The Sopranos and American existentialism. In this, Schulman studies to look at characters that we relate to as individuals that seem to be free and responsible for their own lives. Within that show, if you haven't watched it, I mean, not everybody's cup of tea, but it really does show a different side to leaders of organized crime and how they are people too. It's just they tend to make the wrong decisions. But they make the decisions what they feel is best for their family, or the family, as you might say. Another one is called the second project from Project Muse. It's called the Journal of American Academy of Religion. The article is The National Prayer Breakfast Surrounded by a Christian Mafia. And it's a question. And I read it because I thought that it was interesting that they use the term mafia as to imply there is something sinister or underhanding or controlling power around the National Prayer Breakfast or in religious organizations themselves. So I thought that was a good psychological connection there. And I already mentioned in discussions about the data will be used, the psychological impact of the mafia or the Hollywood romance with the mafia. However, one book that I must mention is from Selwyn Robb in 2016. That is a reissued book. It's called The Five Families, The Rise, Decline, and Resurgence of America's Most Powerful Empires. I also watched an interview with him where he is discussing his book on the Today Show and really goes into how he feels about it, and he's been studying it for a very long time. He talks about the five families in New York and beyond, and how they were in every aspect of our country, and how it's basically a mirror image of what he sees as American capitalism and the influence of government until the 1990s, when the government kind of looked away because they were more like, if we shut them down at the docks, then how are all these restaurants going to get their fish so that they can sell and keep production going, consumerism. So that was a lot of reasons why the government just kind of turned their head and looked the other way. They just didn't want to get involved with it. But those are some of the sources that I got this week, and I hope you have a blessed week. Thank you.